Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this second session of the International Higher Education Commission, which is kindly supported by Oxford International Education Group. My name is Chris Skidmore. Some of you may know me as having been the sort of former University of Science, Research and Innovation Minister between 2018 and approximately 2020. During that time, I was delighted to have played a role in publishing the UK government's first ever international education strategy in May 2019, and also to have worked on getting across the line the return of the 2-year post-study work visa. Since then, having left government, I've been delighted to see that effectively, we have met the targets in the international education strategy, and that we now have reached a point where the 600,000 figure is likely to be a new norm for the future, and that we are now in a place where it's important to think afresh, I believe, about what a future international education strategy should look like. And this is why we decided to put together the International Higher Education Commission in order to ask the sector what itself wanted to see from a new strategy. Could we create an international education strategy 2.0? Since then, and this was totally independent to setting up the commission, there have been obviously rumours off that the government and the Home Office are considering potentially changing the visa regime again for international students. And obviously this has been highly alarming for the sector, potentially creating a new form of instability, particularly at a moment in time when other countries internationally are looking to recruit students from abroad and look to expand and enhance their visa offers for the future. So the topic for this session is actually going to be focusing on that very question of the international student visa, what we should do in order to be able to not only try to encourage government not to take a decision that might be perverse and actually run against the opportunity that international students present to the future of the UK's economy and creating greater prosperity. And effectively, we also want to ask, though, are there changes that potentially might need to make in order to instill future confidence in the student visa route? Indeed, is there a case for removing student visas altogether from international visa numbers and migration numbers for the future? These are questions that we all want to discuss today as part of this session. We are meant to be joined by the chair of the Education Select Committee, Robin Walker. Robin has just been texting me saying he's struggling with the link at the moment. So I think what I might ask is if we could potentially slightly change the format in that we've got 2 other presentations after Robin. And what I might ask actually, Simon Emmett, if Simon, we could potentially start with your overview presentation while I get Robin on the call. He's struggling with the link in order so that we can proceed according to time. Simon, would that be okay with you, do you think?
Absolutely, yeah, happy to do this.
Well, in that case, sorry to jump you in this way, Simon, but I'm delighted that Simon Emmett, CEO of IDP Connect, has agreed to give a presentation rich in data on the current overview of the situation when it comes to student international recruitment, and in particular around what's been happening in recent months, where are the opportunities, where are also some of the challenges. So Simon, while I try to get Robin on the line, we're going to go to you and then maybe try to get Robin back in after your presentation. So over to Simon. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris. Thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. And yeah, I'll share the very latest student insights for the IDP platform. But before I do that, I think it's worth just reflecting on the position that we're in, and I think commending the UK sector for fantastic success in recent months and years. The way that the sector has liaised and the engagement for government, I can see from as I say from a global perspective, has really led the way. So I think to start with the highlighting the impact of this fantastic collaboration. And Chris, going back to the work that you did in your role in 2018 and 2020, I think it is worth pointing out how highly unusual the market has been in recent years. And if you look at the markets that the UK has typically competed with, the leading destination markets of US, Australia, and Canada, all faced significant disruption, whether that's in visa delays, which particularly impacted Canada and now the US, whether it's travel restrictions in the case of Australia in particular, or delays in in-person delivery. And so the UK benefited from those conditions and certainly contributed to meeting and exceeding that 600k figure. However, now the conditions have changed markedly, and every destination, all the leading destinations, are looking to rebuild their international student numbers, their communities, and also labour markets as well. And I will, to illustrate that, I will share my screen. Firstly, by looking at the post-study work rights, and this really highlights the policy changes, and all, as I said, all markets looking to rebuild international student numbers and support labour market gaps, whether that's short term, some policies brought in and relaxed now by Australia, but for Canada, or medium term labour market needs. And if you look at this table, it illustrates the post-study work opportunities and minimum study years. And if you look at the UK, whilst there was progress, as Chris said at the start, if you look at it now, the UK is in is a less favourable position in terms of post-study work. And bringing it up to speed, if you now look at Australia, that's got 4 years eligibility for bachelor degree graduates, up from 2 years, 5 years for master degrees, up from 3 and 6 years for PhD graduates, up from 4. So the conditions have certainly changed in recent months. So what I want to do now is take you through the latest student insights and what impact is this global competition having on the very latest student demand, searches. And the first data chart I'll show you looks at students that are using the IDP digital channels and searching for the different destinations. This chart shows the share of searches on the website for the 4 leading destinations. And you can see in blue, if you come to the right-hand side of the chart, that the US is now the most searched for destination of those 4. In second place now is Canada. And in third place, in orange, is the UK. And you can see in the recent weeks and months that share has declined, which may be linked to some of the statements and some of the rumours that have been shared. If you look at the bottom, Australia, you can see their share is increasing, but also note the scale of the axis. That actually the gap between all of the destinations is pretty close. In some markets where UK had been leading the way, it is no longer doing so. And this data is important because it gives a very good indication of what future applications and future enrolments are going to be. Students searching now are typically looking to go on and enroll in 12 to 18 months. And this has given us a very good indication. Previously, it did that when the graduate route was reintroduced. You can see the UK share is declining. Another way of looking at it is based on applicant and offer holders. And for this, I'm going to look at our latest emerging futures research, which was in the field through to September. And one of the questions that we asked in that is, which destinations are you, applicants and offer holders, considering? And you can see the chart here illustrates that Canada is the most considered destination. 52% of IDP applicant and offer holders are considering Canada as a destination, 49% for Australia. You can see UK in third place now, behind Canada and Australia. What's also very significant is the black line. The black line on each of the charts indicates of those students considering each destination, which had marked that destination as their first choice. So not only is Canada the most considered destination by 52%, half of those, 50% of those students have marked Canada as their first choice. And similarly, a high percentage again for Australia, but a lower percentage for the UK and the US. So fewer students are considering the UK as a destination, and a smaller share of those have indicated it would be their first choice. And that certainly has been a shift from previous surveys. So what is driving this marked change? Same survey, Emerging Futures was in the field through to September, asked students what their perceptions are of the different destinations. So this chart, this screen grab from our dashboards, asked students, it visualizes the questions where we asked students of these 5 criteria: welfare of international students, post-study work visa, quality of education, graduate employment opportunities, and value for money. Which destination, or how do you regard each destination? 0, poorly regarded; 10, highly regarded. And really, as a destination, you want to be on the right-hand side of this. And what stands out is that, again, as in previous surveys, the UK has performed well in this question in terms of the perception of the quality of education, just behind the US, but above average. And you can see it's towards the right hand, right towards the right hand side of this chart. But the changes in the other categories, value for money, which I guess you could link to the quality of education and perhaps foreign exchange movement. But the other categories, you see the UK lags behind. It's below average, and it's also now behind Australia in graduate employment opportunities, post-study work visas, and the welfare of international students. So movement to left, but importantly, Canada and Australia leading the way for a number of these factors. And if we look at a similar question in a different way, what we asked students of why are they choosing each of their first choice destinations. And so this data, again from Emerging Futures, looks at why are students choosing the 4 leading destinations. And what you can see here, what stands out for both the UK and the US, is the 2 key drivers are the high quality of education and the attractiveness of institutions. And you can see that the competition and obviously the interest in the US has increased under the new administration, but you can see they're the 2 things that the UK and the US have clearly done well, and that goes back a number of years. But if you contrast that with Canada and Australia, those factors are still important for prospective international students, but look at the breadth of the other reasons. So Australia increasingly being seen as safe for international students, same with Canada. Canada in terms of being supportive and the ease of obtaining a post-study work visa. So the UK is very much relying on those 2 factors. It doesn't have the same broad appeal that Canada and Australia do with our applicants and offer holders. So if I could summarize the latest student data insights, but that aren't only flowing through for searches and inquiries, but also applications where year-on-year growth is considerable into Canada, and even growth for Australia compared to 2019 is considerable. 3 factors that I think the sector, the UK sector, could focus on to enable sustainable growth. The first is on delivering for the students who have been recruited. The UK is perceived to offer a high quality of education, and it needs to demonstrate that it is delivering that through data insights, but also content, through student content to showcase the positive experiences and also ideally data for the outcomes. The second, from a policy perspective, as we've seen in post-study work, the UK is less competitive than it was 2 to 3 years ago. And the question for the Commission is to consider enhancements for priority segments. And thirdly, promotion. So the UK, as we've seen, is perceived less favourably than the other leading destinations for key factors, and that's what students are sharing with us right now. So for the sector to consider enhanced promotion to address those concerns, but also the motivations and the drivers on students making their final choices. So that's the latest data, as I said, in summary. Great enrolment numbers into the UK. Market conditions have changed, and certainly student perceptions and searches have changed. I'll pass back to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Simon, for that overview and a really informative, data-rich opportunity there for us to sort of see what are not only the latest sort of market trends, but where things are shifting and potentially where the policy responses might need to come in order to reflect how the UK can restore a market edge if it wants to, I guess. And I think that's the key question, is that to what extent the UK does as a government value international students, and this opportunity to really capture a growing market is for myself a not just a challenge, but one of the key policy questions we need to get to grips with in 2023. I'm delighted now, actually, we have been joined by Robin Walker. Robin was Education Minister most recently in the DfE. He'd been continuously a minister in a number of departments, including in Northern Ireland, in that ministry called DEXU. You might remember he was a highly competent and effective minister helping to take the UK in its transition through leaving the European Union. So I know that Robin has had experience both international as well as domestic. I was delighted to see he got elected as the chair of the Education Select Committee, replacing Rob Halfon, who's now gone back in to the Department of Education to be the relevant minister actually for international students. And we're looking forward to hearing from Minister Halfon in January. It looks likely the 17th of January is the date to mark in your diary for that. But if I could hand over to Robin. Robin, I fully understand you've only been in post a couple of weeks, and we're not expecting you to be a sort of a expert when it comes to looking at the finer grain of international education policy. But we'd love to be able to hear from yourself more broadly about the work of your committee. I know you had the Education Secretary came to speak to you last week, and I know you'll be on the liaison committee speaking to the Prime Minister tomorrow, I believe. But we're really keen to get a sense of what your early priorities might be and how we can potentially help as the Independent Commission on Higher Education and International Higher Education to set out some of the ideas that you think need to be looked at for the future.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Chris, and thanks for having me. I hope you can hear me okay. And apologies for joining the call slightly late today. I had some problems logging in. I mean, I think this issue of international students is a really important one that we will want to look at in due course as a committee. It's something that I know from having a university in my own constituency, the benefits that international students bring, both in terms of culturally for the domestic students who study alongside them, but also, let's be frank, in terms of the cross-subsidy that they bring into our education system. I know a huge amount of work has been done on the economic value of international students to the UK, and I'm sure that your commission, alongside the all-party parliamentary group for international students, chaired by Lord Bill Amoria, which I attended just the other day, will continue to feed in that work. But I think we also need to think about the diplomatic benefits of having networks of other countries, of the alumni of our universities. And it's something that I was quite struck by in an era of warmer relations than we currently exist between the UK and China. I actually was involved in leading a trade delegation from Worcestershire to southern China, where, as it happened, our university, which started its career as a teacher training college, had a huge network of alumni as a result of long-established relationships with the southern Chinese provinces. And it's just an example of some of the soft power that can come from having alumni spread around the world, not just in terms of the famous fact that there are more world leaders educated in the UK than any other country, and that probably helps us when it comes to things like COP summits and international diplomacy, but also at a lower level when we're talking about experts in teaching, in the sciences, in medicine. Having those networks around the UK, around the world, is, I think, a real soft power benefit for a global Britain. So it is concerning to see some of those slides that we were just shown, showing that we might be becoming a less attractive destination. And it's also been concerning to hear some of the language that we've recently seen in the press about international students, which seems to have implied in some way that the 600,000 target, which I very well remember being hit and surpassed while I was at the Department for Education. I was a schools minister, but I remember it being seen as a very positive indication that we had hit that target ahead of time. But there's since been an impression in some of the communication from the government that target is actually a hard number that we would want to reduce international student numbers back to. And I find that very hard to fathom, I have to say, either in economic terms or in terms of the benefit to our university system. And it's something that I am intending to continue questioning ministers on. As you mentioned, recently had Gillian come to give evidence to the select committee, and I questioned her on that. Robert Halfon came to us last week, and I think he gave a more positive answer, actually, I think, in terms of the ambition to continue to attract international students. But clearly there's a cross-government piece of work to be done in this. Clearly there is something that requires the Home Office for Treasury and DFE to get round a table and discuss the issues, discuss where the benefits are and where the challenges are. And it's no secret, and we've known over a long period of time, that part of the challenge does lie in the net migration statistics, and that because international students are continue to be counted towards the net migration statistics, and unlike many other competitor countries, we treat them as migrants, even though they do tend to leave after a couple of years, or in many cases even after 1 year. That does cause a pressure. And clearly there are those at the Home Office who would like to see the numbers brought down as a result of that pressure. I mean, I think there's scope for a conversation to be a bit cleverer than just looking at the absolute numbers here, and to break people down according to the level at which they're studying, and so on and so forth. What I don't think would fly, and what was, I think, a very strange suggestion in the original Times piece that sparked this controversy, was in some way to break our universities down according to elite universities and non-elite universities. You will recall, Chris, very well the surprise of government when the banding of 6,000 to 9,000 tuition fees was originally set out, and when every single university went straight to the top of that banding. The idea that any university is going to accept being branded as non-elite when it comes to international students, or as when it comes to attracting their domestic students, is, I think, for the birds. And we have to recall that our offer as a country when it comes to attracting international students is very much based on the quality of the institutions, on our rankings in the world league tables, and the fact that we have an exceptional number of exceptional universities. So I think all of our universities need to be seen as elite in this context. We need to make sure that they can continue to attract international students in the right proportions. But of course, that doesn't mean is in any way domestic students should lose out on places. And one of the things I think the sector has to get better at arguing is the cross benefits to domestic students of being able to study alongside international students, both in terms of their network and their international exposure in an increasingly global world, but also the if we're honest about it, the financial cross benefits of those students coming with a higher level of fees and supporting the system. In an era where tuition fees have been frozen for domestic students and continue to be over a number of years, that cross subsidy is becoming increasingly important for the system. So I think as a committee, we will continue to look at this issue. I think the committee, as far as I can see, are largely persuaded of the benefits of having a strong offer for international students and of being able to continue to attract them. We will continue to quiz ministers on the issue. But of course, the challenge comes that I think with any downward pressure on the numbers is unlikely to be coming from the DfE itself. It's likely to be coming from elsewhere in government. It's likely to be coming from the pressures that are being faced with the Home Office. And that will open questions, again, around the treatment of international students in the overall numbers. If we see this as a migration issue, it will always be challenging. But if we see it as a talent issue, actually, there are very strong arguments for continuing to attract some of the brightest and the best from across the world and continuing to compete with those international peers. And whilst there is some negative news from those slides we've just seen in terms of the overall perception, I do take some comfort from the fact that the UK remains well ahead of some of its closest European competitors, such as Ireland, on many of those categories. And that does show that we can continue to attract a significant proportion of the international student body, which we would want to. I think when it comes to the university rankings, it is remarkable that we are only outnumbered by the United States in the top 100. And when you look per head of population or in terms of the number of institutions that there are, we punch well above our rate. And should certainly continue to attract international students. So it's an agenda I'm very much looking forward to continuing to work on. I think with the work of this commission and in terms of my role as select committee chair, you're probably preaching to the converted. But as it is a cross-government issue, I think it's also an appropriate thing for me to be questioning the Prime Minister on when it comes to the liaison committee. So don't be surprised to see a question or two about international students tomorrow.
Well, Robin, thank you so much for that overview, and I really appreciate not just your sentiment, but I think some of the language you used around how we can move from potentially this being a migration issue to a talent issue. I just wanted to get a sense of your thinking in terms of the politics around this issue of whether do you think we could get international students out of the net migration statistics, or do you think that might be something that it would require a manifesto commitment from a government sort of to put forward that it's sort of unlikely to happen, or sort of do you feel that it would need a campaign that would run for a while to actually get that across the line?
I suspect it's probably more likely to be the latter, and partly for the reason, I think the reason why previous governments have looked at this but balked at the decision is that it's too easily painted as a fix of the numbers. And I think the tabloid press would potentially have a field day in being able to say, oh, well, you're just fixing the numbers by taking this group out of it, and so on and so forth. I think a campaign which can persuade of the merits of the case for doing it, of the logic actually of doing it, given the numbers of international students who do return or go to work elsewhere, but also make the case for a government actually having stood with it in their manifesto and therefore having the credibility to carry it through is more likely to succeed than simply lobbying the existing government. But you never know. And I think it is worth bearing in mind that partly the last serious attempt to get this done failed as a result of the fact that the Prime Minister at the time was a former Home Secretary who felt very personally wedded to some of those targets. Clearly, we now have a Prime Minister who's a former Chancellor, and the Treasury has traditionally come at this from a rather different perspective. So, I think it's certainly worth making the argument, but I would be surprised, to be honest, if it did lead to a change of policy ahead of a general election.
And do you feel that there is any sort of opportunity potentially to look at trade here? I understood one of the decisions to not go ahead with the international student announcement was potentially the instability or the destabilization of the UK-India trade deal at the time, or what message that sent to India. I guess maybe turning that around, do you see opportunities maybe of ensuring that international students feature as potential sort of subsequent deals that could be struck in individual trade deals, if not necessarily to be in the trade deal per se, but maybe as a chapter on international education?
I mean, there are undoubtedly huge opportunities in the education export space when it comes to international trade. And that's something that we should definitely be considering wherever we're looking at trade deals. I think the challenge with the international students issue when it comes to negotiating country by country deals is at the moment you start to include youth mobility or indeed talent mobility as chapters in these trade deals, then you get into a very difficult cross-government conversation in which inevitably you will have other departments pushing back on the benefits of the arrangements. So I can understand some of the sensitivities when it comes to these issues, but there's no doubt, I mean, education is one of our most valuable exports as a country, and that comes from both incoming students and from exports of qualifications with the stamps of our world-class universities on them, and incredible networks of international British language schools as well, which teach in the British system because it is a respected one. It was something I was quite struck by when I went as schools minister and attended the International Summit on the teaching profession, is the very high regard in which our qualifications and our school system, particularly our independent school system, are held by international peers, and that is quite striking in a situation where actually compared to most European countries, we have a smaller independent sector than many other European countries, but it is one which is internationally very well respected and looked up to, and so I think we need to think about the opportunities to support that sector when it comes to our international trade diplomacy. But I think this issue of attaching numbers of student visas to trade deals potentially does become quite fraught quite quickly, and of course it also has a chilling effect potentially on your other trade partners who don't have those deals. So I think where possible we should consider looking at specific youth mobility opportunities with trade deals, as I believe has been part of the Australia New Zealand trade deal. We should be looking at specific issues like that, and then we should be thinking about global talent visas in a way that can benefit all of our trade partners.
Robin, you've very kindly given us quite a lot of your time. I just want to ask one more question, if that was all right, before letting you go. But it was just around the sort of global talent visa. Do you have any sort of hope for the future that might be either expanded, or the 2-year post-study work visa? Do you think an opportunity to be innovative in this space, in terms of thinking what we could achieve for the future?
I certainly hope so, and I think one of the things, just linking it to a talent point and linking it to the fact that actually we are attracting increasing numbers of students to study at higher levels, is potentially linking that post-study work thing, as the Australians have done, to higher levels of qualification. That if you take a higher level of qualification, that it could potentially go for longer, strikes me as a policy definitely worth exploring, and one that could easily be economically justified. I think the other challenge here is, of course, the issue, and the issue that I think the Home Office feel more sensitive about than students per se, is also the issue about dependence. And what we know on that is that the students who tend to bring more dependents aren't necessarily any particular category when it comes to the level of qualification they're taking, but they do tend to be from certain countries around the world. And if we want to have a genuinely global offer, we'll need to be able to continue to attract people from those countries. So we need to think very carefully about how our policies look to people who may want to bring dependents. I think you could argue that it's an entirely rational thing to ask people to bear extra costs on that, as I think we already do with the NHS surcharge. But I think it's hard to argue that we should be turning people down simply on the basis of the culture that they come from and the fact that they're likely to have young children or other dependents in them when they come to this country.
Thank you, Robin. Robin, that's been excellent in terms of giving us food for thought for the discussion we're going to have after our next speaker. So really grateful for you being able to sort of come in a bit later than it planned, but also best wishes for the liaison committee. And we do hope that if you're able to raise international students, that would be all the better. So thank you so much for your time today. I understand if you have to head off. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm now going to turn to our next speaker before we get to a sort of broader discussion of the group. So delighted that Janet Ilieva, who is founder and director of Education Insight, has been able to join us. Janet also has prepared a slide presentation setting out some of the mobility trends around international students. So Janet, am I all right to hand over to you so you can share your slides?
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Chris, for your kind introduction, and good afternoon all. I'm delighted to join today's discussion about the future shape of UK international student visa. And as a way of contextualizing the recent rebound in student visas, I decided to take a historical perspective on that matter. And I shall try to share my slides. I hope they're visible. If we look historically at the issued visas back to 2005, as far as the immigration statistics go to, I think that the recent rebound in 2021 and 2022 is significant, but only if compared to a period of very low growth. If we look at the issued visas between 2009 and 2019, there was 1.7% increase in the issued visas. And this is quite in stark contrast to what has been happening in other study destinations like Canada, Australia, United States, and other countries. If we compare the growth in 2021 to 2009, then this is 33% growth. And as such, it is perhaps a moderate growth, given that we're talking about a significant 12 years period of time. The reintroduction of the post-study work route in 2021 aligns the UK with other study destinations that Simon elaborated on in his presentation. I have the latest 2022 year here, but this is just the Q3. As such, the current data is not strictly comparable, but the rebound or the surge in issued visas is expected to be higher than what is currently shown on the chart. I must highlight some of comparability issues. Until 2021, EU students were out of the immigration statistics. And also beyond the past 3 years, the visa statistic was based on Tier 4 issued visas to main applicants. Looking at the definitions for student visas between the UK and those in other countries, it is worth mentioning that the international student visas in Australia are classed as visas for temporary residence, whereas the definition that the United States uses is non-immigrant visitor temporarily in the USA to study. So none of these two comparator countries classes their students as immigrants. Looking at the right to bring dependents, other countries, yes, they allow their international students to bring dependents. And I've also considered work during term time or while the students are studying. In Australia, this is unlimited 20 hours in the UK. In the US, it's on campus only for the first years of study only. And Simon elaborated on the post-study work rights in other countries. Again, drawing on Simon's presentation, it seems that the UK's unique selling point or strong advantage is the quality of higher education. And I have attempted to measure quality just by using some of the statistics from the Higher Education Statistics Agency. Looking at the international students' continuation rates, so this is measured for full-time undergraduate students, and this is the continuation from year 1 into year 2 of study. What is quite evident here is that international non-EU students have lower non-continuation rates compared to UK students. So this holds true for non-EU students and EU students. 5% of the international students don't continue into second year of their undergraduate course compared to 7% of the UK student population. And I believe that this is, comparatively speaking, this is a very strong fact that can be used in the promotion of the UK as an international study destination. UK not only equips students with the skills and knowledge required for their further career, but also graduates, students that come to the UK, the majority of them graduate their course. I refer to an analysis, a blog piece, which was published by Nick Hillman last year, which looks at non-continuation at UK universities and compares it across that of other study destinations. And in that piece, the UK comes across as the country with the highest continuation rates globally. Bearing in mind that international students have high continuation of the local student population, I believe that UK is perhaps a world leader in that space. And it is certainly an area that the success of international students in the UK can be benchmarked against that of other countries. I also believe that this area of student success is perhaps underlooked or underexplored in the global education promotion of the UK. Another area that signals the international competitiveness of the UK international higher education is the student satisfaction with the academic courses. So I've looked at question 27 of the National Student Survey, and again, international students have comparatively higher satisfaction rates compared to the UK student population. There have been some reductions during the time of the pandemic. We've seen declines in the past 2 years, well, in 2020 and 2021. There is a bit of a rebound in 2022. And it is certainly an area that is worth keeping an eye on as we continue to monitor the space. And just to bring to conclusion and draw some main observations from this conversation, the UK's international competitive advantage is quality of education. And we are seeing that through high completion rates, high student satisfaction, and good graduate employability. The visa data shows a strong rebound compared to a period of no growth. We've seen a decade of no growth in international student numbers. However, if we compare the recent surge in student-issued visas, then this is moderate compared to a decade ago. It is also fair to mention that the EU and China are the UK's largest sources for undergraduate students, and Brexit is adversely affecting EU demand for undergraduate study, whereas geopolitics is affecting negatively the higher education relations with China. This, however, limits demand to the next largest countries, which is India, population 1.4 billion, Nigeria and Pakistan, some of the world's largest countries. However, these three countries are predominantly masters markets, and the implication of this is that most of the master students in the UK are only in the UK for 1 year. This means that visas are required to be issued annually. And with the transition or the shift from undergraduate towards more postgraduate level of study, this will affect the turnover of student visas required to enable these students to study in the UK. International student status as immigrants is detrimental to the UK's export agenda, as we heard from Robin Walker. Education exports are significant, however, they remain invisible to the UK taxpayer simply because they remain reported under the tourist industry on the balance of payments. The geographical shift in global student demand towards countries with high level demand at the master's level means that at master's level, students have to be replenished annually, and this results in higher volume of visas required. The UK is also a world leader in transnational education, and transnational education is all the students that are educated abroad in their home countries. TNE makes a significant contribution to the world's sustainability agenda, and as we have found in previous research, many transnational education students come to the UK to spend time of their degree in the UK. As the global economic downturn is intensifying, this is likely to increase demand for cost-effective way to acquire UK degree. And as such, we are likely to see a greater proportion of TNE pathways leading students to study programs in the UK, However, to cater to that growth, it also requires a higher volume of student visas. It's essential to say that for the UK higher education to continue to grow internationally, we need not just a large number of countries where students come from, but also diverse pathways. And this requires a change in the treatment of international students as immigrants. And I think this is a key definition that needs to be revisited in the current debate. Thank you, Chris. Over to you.
Thank you, Janet. And what really, I was so struck by with your report there was actually the myth busting and the statistics you're able to demonstrate, completely disprove, I think, some of the sort of popular narratives that potentially exist around international students, and actually demonstrating on both on satisfaction, on continuation rates, that UK is leading, not just on quality and attracting students, but once students are here, it's really living up to its reputation. So thank you for that, and we're delighted you've been able to join us, and hopefully we might be able to use some of your statistics as part of our sort of wider commission report as well. I'm going to open up now, if it was all right, for those who are listening in. I've had a couple of comments have been passed on to me from those who've been listening in so far. But what I wanted to do was use sort of remaining sort of 10 minutes of the session to sort of get a sense from the audience around some of the priorities of thinking about international student visas for the future. If reform can be made, where should reform come? What should be the sort of key messages that we should be promoting in the Commission? We've heard from Simon, from Janet, and Robin, all of whom had, I think, some really enlivening points to that you should be fed now back into this sort of, what we're going to do is create an interim report specifically on visas as part of this process. But whether anyone wanted to sort of raise their hands, I'm happy to share the floor. If anyone wanted to make a contribution now, be more than welcome to do so. I've had some points that have been made in the chat as well, but if anyone would like to come in, you're more than welcome to do so. Just trying to see whether we can have a look at the gallery. Excellent. Okay. If we've got Mita Adita Varman. Mita, would you like to come in? You will see your hands raised. Then we've got Nick Beach.
Hi, thank you for allowing me this platform. My name is Aditya Mehta. I'm a PhD student at the University of Leeds, and I'm also a student ambassador at UKISA, which is the United Kingdom Council for International Student Affairs. This is my first year at the University of Leeds, and if there's one thing that I think deserves a little bit of thought is the process for international students settling into the UK, because housing has been an issue. I can attest to this myself, having spent over a month trying to find a place to stay. And I'm aware of a number of international students who've had the same struggles. In part, the private rental market is almost inaccessible to international students, where a number of landlords and agencies have asked international students to pay 6 to 12 months rent in advance if they can't provide a guarantor. And that's often very challenging for international students coming from the various countries that Janet just listed. Additionally, there are other things such as banking, for example, that have been problematic. And unless you have a place to stay, it's almost impossible to have a bank account. Again, I can attest to this myself, having spent over 2.5 months trying to set up a bank account in the UK. And what is happening now is that although the UK has reached its 600,000 students mark per year, a lot of international students who have come in are expressing, for lack of a better word, their grievances at the difficulty that they've had in settling into the UK. And for a master's students, if they have to spend that amount of time on basic life essentials, that becomes difficult because they're only here for a year and they end up spending over 3 months' time just trying to settle themselves in. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I think that really points to some of the underlying issues that we're looking to take forward as part of this commission, and be great to stay in contact to maybe follow up in some more detail on the points you've made. But really do appreciate that sort of tension if the expansion of student numbers creates all these other secondary issues. How do we make sure this whole situation is sustainable for the future? Nick Beach. Nick, thanks so much for joining us. Again, Nick is Vice Chancellor of Middlesex University. I'm delighted he's going to be involved with the commission. So Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Chris, and I'm delighted to be involved and hugely enthusiastic. I'm so glad to be following that last comment, because the thing that I was actually thinking about was one of my other hats, which is in the UK Standing Committee for Quality Assessment, UK Standing Committee. And on that, we have 3 student reps. We have all of the funding bodies, UFS and SFC, Wales, and so on. But we have 3 student reps, and actually 2 of them turn out to be international, one of them from the UK, and that's just the way that the voting happens for students. So we were already underway with looking at some of the international student experience, much in line with what we've just heard. But the other thing that I think, as others were presenting, it did strike me, was that those students are very, very aware of the cross-subsidy that's going on, and fairly so. But what we've probably not done so much of, and the NSS, I think, doesn't quite get at this, is the real value in the views of UK students of having more diverse learning experiences because of having international students in the labs, in the studios, in the classrooms. And given that we're just about to get going with the next phase of that research, we were already going to be asking about international experience, but it strikes me that perhaps we could add some questions that would relate specifically to the value of UK students of having a more diverse classroom. And there is other work around that, but I'm just thinking now might be an opportune moment if that would be helpful. The other thing that I was just thinking about was, and I thought that Janet and Simon's presentations were fantastic. And in Simon's list of things that are at the top of the attractors, it was also quite interesting, some of the things that weren't highlighted down at the bottom of the list of attractors, because sometimes there might be things that we could think about there, and particularly things like cost of living or perceptions of cost of living, which was pretty low down at the sort of 10, 11%. But there may be things that we can think about in terms of the way we structure banking, welfare, other sorts of bursaries that we do provide at the moment, but make those packaged in a way that would be much more favorable or move them up the list in terms of attractors. But those are just one thought and one offer, really.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And I think that point, I saw that as well. When you looked at the states, they had this sort of scholarship question, the packages, and obviously I know the States has quite a historic sort of institutional scholarship arrangement, but to what extent the UK can try to create that sort of holistic wraparound approach maybe for the future would be really interesting. Louise Nicol is patiently had a hand up. Louise, thanks so much. And you've made some great points in the chat as well that have been forwarded to me around the low take up of the post-study work visa as well, which is also a striking statistic.
Yes, so these statistics come from AGCAS and HESA, but it turns out that only 7, some people would say 9% of international students have in fact taken up the offer of post-study work. If we compare and contrast that with Australia, that's had post-study work throughout the period that the UK did not under the May legislation, only 17% of international students in Australia in fact stay on. So my big beef in all of this debate is, what is the UK doing for those students that return home? As Robin very ably pointed out, our soft power, our influence overseas is hugely impacted by these students. And it seems to me that we are very much focusing on a very small minority with all of the debate on post-study work, whether it's visas, etc. I personally feel students should be taken out of the immigration stats, that absolutely. But I think that will be politically very unpopular for the majority of the electorate, and I think it wouldn't do any government looking to be re-elected any favours. So I think that's probably off the table. But my major concern is that we are espousing so much energy on post-study work and little, if any, on supporting students go home. And as by far the majority do so, I think this should be a major focus. The other thing about this is if we actually collect data on this, this is very politically popular. If we can prove to government that in all universities of all shades, of all types, be it arts institutions, be it specialist institutions, be it students at different levels of the rankings, that their students that graduate go home to successful, thriving, economically driven careers, then that has to be a win for government. And it's time we started measuring it, and it's time we started focusing on that part of the student population, which in the UK's case is 90% of international students.
So would you argue for some kind of extended national alumni network where maybe we would maintain the contact with these students?
Absolutely. I would. The first thing I would do is I would do an audit of people in high level positions working in overseas companies and share that with the DIT, because that would be of huge interest to them. I would also look. The British Council have never managed to capture alumni. I've never known why that's the case, but they never have managed to do it. So I think now is an opportune time for the UK to capture as much international alumni data as possible and start tracking international alumni through their careers. I don't think there's no reason we can't do it. It's not financially prohibitive, really. And I think it would be massive, both for UK education exports, direct inward investment, and also to evidence the amazing impact all of our universities have, not just Oxford and Cambridge. All of our universities have an immense impact overseas when their graduates return. And I think, you know, arbitrary measures based on rankings, allowing or not allowing universities to recruit international students would be suicidal for the sector, because it would undermine the reputation of all universities, not just some. It would undermine everyone's reputation. So I think we need a pivot. We need to be focusing on those that go home, not just those that stay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to slightly run over time, but I'm conscious Anne-Marie Graham has got a last point, I think, which I'd like to make, and then I'm going to close the session, but I'm conscious people wanting to go on to other meetings. So over to Anne-Marie. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Louise. I'm just going to build on Louise's point. I think there's actually something very easy we can do about measuring our international graduate outcomes a lot better. As Louise says, we owe it to all of our international graduates to do so. And it's a key part of that international student experience. And one thing that we have changed recently in HESA, which is now part of GIST, has changed the way in which it collects its graduate outcomes from international graduates. And has completely adapted that. So actually we're seeing whereas before we had an incredibly high response rate for international graduates, that response rate has plummeted since the methodology has changed. So I think in terms of one simple policy fix that we have within our own sector and our own mechanisms within our own sector is to reinstate a much more reinstate what we had before. I mean, obviously we'd need to look at for a cost-effective solution to deliver it, but I think look at how we can reach out better to international graduates and really do that properly, because without that, we're not going to be able to have that data as a sector for our recruitment strategies, to be able to talk to prospective students about what the UK sector can deliver throughout that whole student journey. So I think that's for this commission, that would be a very useful policy ask for us to move back to.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for joining today. I kept it an hour. Maybe I should make these sessions slightly longer, but there's always a tension between how many people want to sort of sign up for an hour session versus an hour and a half. I think we've had some excellent sort of contributions. In terms of the commission, I decided that we would sort of not publicly announce the commissioners till next year in January to give it a big bang moment. We've got the Minister responsible for international education, Rob Halfon, coming to speak to us 17th of January. Pencil in 2 p.m. I'm just trying to finalize the time, but it's likely to be 2 p.m. on the 17th of January. And a number of people joining the call today have very kindly agreed to be commissioners on the International Higher Education Commission. If you're still interested potentially in being involved, please do let myself know, or also go to the website contact@ihecommission.uk. We've been overwhelmed with the people who've shown an interest, and we're delighted to be able to build as big a coalition as possible to try to demonstrate that there is a cross-sectoral interest in looking at what a new international education strategy can be for the future, and what this must encompass. For the next session, we're going to be looking at international education exports more broadly. The point being that actually this is one of the targets we haven't met for the future. So how can we get out to be able to promote UK PLC more broadly as part of that sort of wider international economic narrative as well? But the Minister will be speaking to us and will be announcing the full lineup of the Commission. Quite excited by who we've got on board. So I can't tell you just yet, but hopefully all will be revealed in 2023. And thank you to everyone for joining us. We hope you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and look forward to re-engaging on this critical issue in the new year. Thank you very much, and goodbye.